Glad to be here. I'm actually from Utah, which is great because most of the time I don't get to interact with other people from Utah because we're always flying all over the country. So I'll give you guys a little background about myself, why I do this work, and how I think it can have an impact for leaders and teams. And then I'll give you a little background on the Table Group, who we are as an organization. And then we'll go through some of the models that I think might be able to help you in your businesses. So you'll find out very early, I am not normally like a public speaker, I'm a consultant. So I'm actually going to try to engage with you all. So if I ask a question, it's not rhetorical. I'm going to ask you guys a few questions throughout. So if you could engage, it would be great. And then we'll dive in. So please poke holes. Like literally, if you want to make this applicable to your team, the best way to do that is lean in. We love to make this practical, relevant, fast for you guys. So a little bit about me is my name's Thompson. I grew up in Roy. Usually I tell people I grew up in Ogden because nobody knows where Roy is. But yesterday I used the term Roy. And people were like, oh, I'm from Roy. I was like, this is awesome. I never meet anyone from Roy. So I grew up in Roy, grew up a cowboy. So we had a bunch of horses and we do a lot of rodeoing. So my dad would ride bulls. My mom would ride barrels and poles. And I have a twin brother. We would compete in what's called mutton busting. Anybody know what that is? Where you ride sheep. So fell in love with the outdoors super early. Went to the University of Utah, wanted to marry my passion and profession. So ended up graduating and working for the North Face for years. So I was the global product manager, made all the products for the running, training, climbing categories. And then I found out we had an office in Switzerland. And if you've ever been to Switzerland, you should try to live there your whole life. And so I just kept bothering people until they allowed me to move to Switzerland and work out of our Swiss office. And simultaneously, my brother and I started a company. So I was working at the North Face. My brother was actually working at the Table Group at the time. And we started our own company, and he kept introducing these models that I'm going to go through with you today. And at the time, I didn't know what they were. I didn't know anything about the Table Group or the books that we're going to go through today. And so I ended up saying like, hey, why are you trying to make us more corporate? I don't know what this is. Like, let's just create a company that we want to work at. Let's be friends. And so we never really implemented these models. And so ended up leaving the North Face, starting my own consulting practice in the outdoor industry, doing all the smart stuff, like go-to-market strategies, product lifecycle development, all the stuff that I knew on the smart side that made me good at what I did. Started consulting in that area. My brother came back to me and said, hey, if you're going to be a consultant, you should really read our books. And so finally, I started reading these books. I started implementing some of the models that we're going to go through today. And I saw a way bigger ROI on the teams that I work with from the healthy side of the organization rather than the smart side. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. Fast forward a few years, Patrick Lencioni asked me to come watch him speak at an event like this with CEOs up in Toronto. I didn't realize it at the time, but it was a 7-hour interview plane ride one way and a 7-hour interview plane ride back, where he asked me if I wanted to consult with the Table Group. I've been doing that ever since. I really believe that this is the last job I'll ever have. I love working with leaders and teams, getting you guys more aligned and rowing in the right direction so you can achieve more as an organization. So that's a little bit about me, a little bit about the Table Group. If you're not familiar with it, Table Group has been around for 25 years. It was founded by Patrick Lencioni, who is a best-selling author. He's written, as of yesterday, he released his 13th book. 11 of those have been on the bestseller list. One we're going to go through today has been on the bestsellers list for 900 weeks. So I recommend picking it up and reading it. It's a really good one. Patrick started the Table Group because when he was a kid, his dad would come home after working like 10, 12 hours, totally drained, totally miserable, and complain about this thing called management. And even Pat, when he was 7 years old, he said, when I grow up, I want to fix management so that fathers and mothers can come home and be more fulfilled and have more energy to play with their kids. And so that stuck with him as he went to school. He graduated from Santa Clara. He got, at the time, what was considered the best job coming out of college for a graduating senior, consulting at Bain. Do you guys know Bain? Big strategic consulting firm on the East Coast, management consulting. Like he literally went to go fix management so people could be more fulfilled. And he worked at Bain for a while, and he would go into these, working with these teams, executives, and he would run all these reports and generate all this data for them to be more smart and to outpace their competitors. He'd hand over those reports to his boss, and he would say, hey, here's that report you wanted. Are we going to talk about any of that other stuff? And they were like, no, we don't talk about that other stuff. So he left Bain, and through a series of, you should watch some of his videos online. denied a job with Steve Jobs one time, which is pretty incredible. He's got some really incredible stories as he founded the Table Group. And the Table Group exists to talk about that other stuff. We are called the Table Group, not because we make tables, even though we get a lot of those phone calls. But we're called the Table Group because we believe the table is the best piece of technology ever invented for making decisions. If you guys can actually get around a table and have healthy conflict, you're going to make better decisions faster. And that's what we want to do here. So that's the background of the Table Group. We're going to go through how we believe organizational health is a competitive advantage. Is this on / working? That's okay. We're going hands only. That's fine. It doesn't matter. So here's some of the books we're going to go through. Hidden throughout this room, there are 3 books. I'm just kidding. Sherry has some prizes at the end for the most engagement. That's actually not true either. She's going to give you guys some books later. So we're really going to outline today. Thank you. We're going to outline today on 2 of our books. The overall kind of encompassing how we become a healthy organization is called The Advantage. Highly recommend you read that. And then the second one is going to be The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And that's our most popular book. It's sold 6 million copies. You might be familiar with that one. So we're going to deep dive into both of those today. The one that we just released yesterday, really good book. It's called The 6 Types of Working Genius. And it's about what parts of our job and our work actually provide us joy and fulfillment and what types drain us. So look that one up. It just launched yesterday. So in 25 years of consulting, we've actually determined that there are really 2 elements to success for any organization, any size. Doesn't matter if you're Fortune 500 or a nonprofit, a church, a school, it doesn't matter. The first side is you have to be smart. Like you have to understand, how are we going to win at strategy, marketing, sales, product, technology, HR, finances? All of those things you have to be good at. And in fact, you probably wouldn't be a business if you weren't good at these things. The problem with most organizations is when they run into problems, they try to solve it on this side. Oh, that was a bad product strategy. Let's bring in a new product person, or let's go get another marketing company to do another marketing strategy. And so the reason leaders tend to go solve problems on this side is because the light's better on that side, right? It's like what we went to school for. It's what we know. It's probably why you were hired, for example. And it's measurable. And so oftentimes we try to solve problems on this side, but we actually think this is only half the equation, but it gets 99% of the attention. And to tell you the truth, in 25 years of consulting, we have 40 consultants in the US, 50 around the world. We've actually never been to a team and just walked into a room of executives and gone, I think these guys are just too dumb. Like they don't get it. Like that never happens. You guys are really, really talented at this side. So we need to find out what's the other side that will maximize the smart. So we also believe that you have to be healthy. And just as equally as important, we need to become a healthy organization. When we talk about health, we talk about minimizing politics. So when I ask you guys, what does politics look like on a team? What would you guys say? Division. Yeah, like silos. I'm my team, my department. Exactly. What else? Yeah. Exactly. That's a good one. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Airtime. Yeah, go ahead. Yep. So debating ego rather than ideas. Yeah, I'm right, you're wrong, not this is right for us. Yeah, exactly. So we define politics 3 ways, and you guys hit on a lot of them, is changing what you say based on who's in the room, right? If we're changing what we say based on who's in the room, we're creating a political environment. If people are changing what they say when we're in the room, we've created politics within our organization. So we can go in and add, like I could pull someone aside in my office and say, hey, let's go into this meeting and let's tell, so-and-so CEO what we think. Then we walk into the meeting, we're like, yes, sir, no, ma'am, yes, it's a great idea. Like we just change what we say because we're worried about how it's gonna come across. So that's one sign of politics. Another sign of politics is a meeting after a meeting. You guys ever been in one of those meetings where you don't talk during the meeting and then you follow someone in their office and then you're like, hey, can we talk about what just happened in there? I work with Nike. They call it the Nike nod. They go, oh yeah, great idea. Yeah. And then they just follow each other into their offices or create a Zoom room. And then they talk about the real idea, right? So right now with a Zoom environment, where it's no longer the meeting after the meeting, it's the meeting during the meeting. You can just pop open a window and instead of saying something in the room, you can just type it to them and not have to say what needs to be said. So changing what you say based on who's in the room, meeting after the meeting. And then the third one is withholding information until you think it's the right time, right? Like when you're going to advocate for your team, your department, your promotion, your bonus, etc. So what we're saying is when we see healthy teams, they have minimal amounts of that. We're never going to eliminate politics. We're never going to eliminate, some of those hallmarks of politics, but we can minimize them. And we can minimize them based on some disciplines that we're going to talk through. So first sign is minimal politics. Second is minimal confusion. Have you ever been in a meeting where like 100 things are discussed and then you leave the meeting going like, what do we decide, right? So that's really low level confusion. It's really tactical confusion. And we try to solve that with how we work through meetings. We wrote a book called Death by Meeting. If you haven't read it, you've probably lived it at some point in your career. But it's we have a very prescriptive approach to meetings, and it's really like, hey, we need to be really clear about what was discussed, what was decided, and how we're going to cascade this to the rest of the organization and who needs to be cascaded to. So it's really discipline around and how we're running effective meetings. So there's low level confusion of how are we making those tactical decisions that are moving us forward. But there's really high level confusion at some organizations as well. What are we doing here? Like, why do we even exist as an organization? What's the culture you're asking me to be a part of? I understand our 5-year strategy, but what does that look like in the next 6 months? And so we help teams minimize confusion at both like a kind of a North Star like altitude as well as the tactical on the ground altitude. And so if we can minimize politics and confusion, generally teams that do that really well, they have a high sense of morale. People like coming to work when you're really clear about what their job is and you're celebrating wins. A perfect example of this is Chick-fil-A. So we've worked with Chick-fil-A, Southwest Airlines, Ford Motor Company for years. Why does it feel different when you go to a Chick-fil-A than when you go to a Burger King? Like, yeah, go ahead. My pleasure. Yeah. 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 And it's a cultural thing. It's the same industry. It's clean. You know what you're getting. Yeah, I was telling a story yesterday is our schedules are really weird. We're always traveling. I like to play golf. And so I'll play golf on like a Wednesday. And so I'll be swinging to the course. I'll drop into a Chick-fil-A and I'll tell, I'll be picking up a chicken sandwich. This kid's working the window at a drive-through. And I'll say, hey, I hope you have a good day. And he goes, oh, I will. And I'm like, is this guy going to have a better day than me? Like, I'm going golfing and this guy's working at a chicken restaurant. And it's because they have a great culture. Like, people love coming to work, right? And there's a difference. You can feel it as a customer. Why does it feel different? There's something going on there. And it's because they have a lot of clarity. They've minimized politics. They've minimized confusion. And so when we can minimize politics and confusion, we can create a better sense of morale within the organization. And that will allow us to increase productivity. There's a higher level of productivity when there's less politics and less confusion and people love coming to work. Chick-fil-A does nearly $5 million per franchise and is closed on Sundays. McDonald's does 2.5. So there is an ROI, an actual ROI to creating a healthy culture, right? And if we can do this really well, if we can minimize politics, minimize confusion, create a high sense of morale, and be more productive, we see that healthy teams have low turnover of good people. We call it healthy turnover. People who are committed and engaged in where we're going as an organization and our culture, they stay. And the people who are not, they leave. They could be really good functionally at their job, but if they're not committed to our culture and where we're going, we would actually say that's healthy turnover. We call them misfits. It's not like they're not great people or great employees. They just don't fit here. And so when we show this to executives, they say, obviously, this makes so much sense. Everything I'm going to show you today is like encompassed in a circle or a triangle. It's really not that intellectually hard to understand. It's the discipline behind it, right? And so half the time they see this, they say, yeah, we want to minimize politics. We want to minimize confusion, but we don't know how. So they go back to the smart side. They try to solve the equation over there. But we would say, if you can focus as an organization and as an executive team on the healthy side, it will actually multiply everything you do on the smart. You will actually become smarter as an organization if you can focus on the healthy side. And so we believe that the last sustainable competitive advantage in business is focusing on this healthy side. Competitive advantage in the smart side is a diminishing return right now. People are really smart. You can hire someone in who has experience from another company or another school. So the last sustainable version of this is going to be on the healthy side. And if you have tried to search for people recently, which is a hard thing for most industries, is people are more looking for culture now than anything. It's no longer just a paycheck that's going to get them to your company. So it's like, what are you doing to create a healthy environment and a healthy organization where I can connect to where we're going? So simple in concept, we would say physical health and organizational health are very similar. In fact, all you need to do is practice 4 simple disciplines. So if we're equating physical health to organizational health, I would say, what does it take to be physically healthy? There's 3 things. You guys know, they're super easy. We learned them in biology. Diet, exercise, rest. This is a healthy table right here, guys. A lot of salad right here. No, just kidding. Diet, exercise, rest, right? It's simple in concept. We consult with like Intermountain Healthcare and Kaiser Permanente. We do these seminars with like really smart doctors, PhDs. They've been in the world of health for a long time. We ask them, hey, what does it take to be physically healthy? Immediately, they're like, diet, exercise, rest. And we're like, good job, you're smart. How many of you do it, right? And so of 300 people who intellectually understand it, maybe 10% of them raise their hand, right? And that's what this is about, is it's about simple disciplines that with repeat focus that will eventually return results. And so when we talk about organizational health, it's similar in that there are really 4 simple disciplines that if you can master as leaders, your organization will become healthy. The first is we have to build a cohesive leadership team. So building a cohesive leadership team is about behavioral alignment. We have to behave like a team before we can function like a team. And we will be the first consulting practice to tell you, being a team is a strategic choice. It is not a virtue. It did not happen because you worked at an organization for 15 years and you were promoted to an executive team. And when we go to teams, oftentimes they start telling us how they function and where they see dysfunction. And what we see oftentimes is most executive teams function like a golf team. Everyone goes out, they shoot their individual score, they bring it back to the table, we add it together and determine success. But that's not a team at all. It's actually a working group. What we need to do is function more like a football team. We share in successes and failure, like we define common results the same way. We all understand our strategy and we all understand our position that we play in achieving that strategy. So being behaviorally aligned is really around 5 simple behaviors that we're going to dive into today. But it's how does our team look when it comes to trust? And we'll talk about vulnerability-based trust versus predictability-based trust. Is do we trust each other enough to have those hard conversations? How does our team look when it comes to conflict? Do we have healthy conflict or do we have constructive conflict or destructive conflict? Or do we live in artificial harmony, which is where a lot of companies live? Once we have conflict and we make a decision, are we committed to those decisions? Are people like literally leaving the room with marching orders and being committed to the decisions that we made, like they were their own, or are they alligator arming everything, right? Because if we're committed, the next behavior would be accountability. We can actually, if we're committed to the same goals and we are committed to the same results, we can actually practice peer-to-peer accountability instead of like, hey, can you go tell them to do their job because I can't do mine, right? And the last behavior is a collective focus on results. When we stop thinking with a working group mentality, and we'll talk about this idea of like team number 1 versus team number 2, when we stop advocating for the team we lead and instead we put the hat on of the team we're on, we can get people rowing in the same direction, okay? So behavioral alignment is the first step. If we don't behave like a team, we can't execute like a team. The next step is gonna be, we have to create clarity. And that's about intellectual alignment. And we talk about clarity as, we actually believe clarity is a strategy. It's part of the fabric of your culture. It's part of your long and short-term goals. And we actually create clarity with an organization based on 6 simple questions. We call them 6 critical questions that you have to answer in any organization because it provides a focus for you guys on what we're gonna actually do here, how we're gonna win, and how we're gonna divvy up the position so that we can ensure that we win. So I'm gonna give you guys an example. Southwest Airlines is a perfect example of using clarity as a strategy. So we're going to talk through the answers to these questions with Southwest Airlines. Okay, so the first question that we answer with teams is, why do we exist? And beyond making money, this is what we're asking. Like beyond saving the world, every business helps people in some way. We should be promoting that type of that storytelling to everyone in our organization so they can connect to something bigger, right? So beyond making money, why do we exist? And most organizations, when we introduce these 6 questions, they go, well, actually, you know what? I don't think we have to answer these because we already have mission, vision, values. And I go, oh, that's awesome. What are they? And they go, here, let me check online real quick. I don't know what they are, right? Like it's great. Mission, vision, values, that's an external expression, right? That's how you want your customers to perceive you. This is about internal alignment, how we're going to win as a team. If this never got outside of your walls, that would be totally fine, but people would be connected to these as a result of internal clarity. So why do we exist? Southwest Airlines, they exist to connect people to the important events of their lives, right? That's very aspirational. There's a, you can take a flight anywhere, but they believe that they're actually helping you connect to the important events of your lives. And so the way they show that is they actually will show a father returning home from deployment to see his daughter for the first time, right? Connecting really important events, or a granddaughter leaving to see her grandfather for the last time, right? We're actually creating an environment where people believe that what they're doing and their function is bigger than their job description. And so we have to paint the picture. This is part of our culture. What are we even doing here? What gets us out of bed if money didn't matter? Next is, how do we behave? And these are our core values. And oftentimes leaders and teams, you guys have a set of core values. A lot of companies have them postered on the walls and stuff, and that's great. But are they core to who we are, right? Like, and one of the things that we see with organizations a lot of time is your core values can fall into like 4 different categories. They can either be core, they can be true about the team that's like in this room and the company as a whole, or they can be aspirational. They could be like, oh, I wish this is who we were, but we don't really practice it, right? So it's a beautiful word, and oftentimes, like, everyone kind of commonly has an understanding of it, but we don't live it out. These are values that we would live out, and these are values that we would look for in employees that we want to hire. These are values that we would protect our employees with and deny business for, right? And so we see this aspirational, like, hey, that's not really true about you. I worked with one company, they said, oh, our core value is integrity. And I was like, okay, I don't see it, but like, well, let's see how it plays out. And then they're talking about interviewing someone from, a big company and giving them a project so they can see how they're doing it over there. And I was like, hey, is anybody going to raise an integrity flag here? Like, this doesn't sound like integrity, right? So it's like, it's a nice word, it's a nice concept, but it doesn't get played out. The next is, it can be permission to play value, right? I work with a bank up in Montana, and the first time we ended up getting in a room together, I was like, oh, what's your value? And they were like, integrity. And I was like, I hope so, because you're taking people's money, right? Like, like you gotta, that seems like a really low bar in this industry. And so it doesn't really separate us. It's not like a competitive advantage. It's not part of our culture. It's just an industry standard. And then the third value that we see oftentimes is an accidental value. An accidental is, maybe we haven't defined our culture enough to actually have words or phrases or stories to know what our values are. So we just start hiring the same people. When I was at the North Face, it was basically like everyone who used to be like living in a cave or in their car, they needed to get a job, and they went to the North Face. So we hired a bunch of outdoorsy people. And we missed out on a lot of people who would have been great for the organization, but they didn't go after it on the weekends, right? And so they didn't feel like they fit in. So we need to be really clear about what our culture is. You have to define your culture. We worked with one executive who went through our process, and he said, culture exists at your company, whether you define it or not. There's a culture that exists. I would recommend that we define it and we like live into the culture, fuel the culture that we want to have. And it's really hard if we don't build a common definition and communicate that definition to everyone. So this is about, these two are really about our culture. Why do we exist? How do we behave? The next is about our business. This is about our strategy. What do we do? I can't tell you how many times we've been in a room with like really smart executives. They're like, what do you do? And they're like, we're a product company. No, we're a cloud storage company. I'm like, you guys don't even really know what you're doing. So that's a hard thing to solve. We want this to be a simple business definition. And the simple business definition, Steve Jobs says, people think that focus means being able to say yes to the things that you need to focus on. But that's not it at all. It's actually saying no to the 100 other good ideas. And that's what this is about. There's so much shiny like opportunity out there that we can get unfocused on things, that we should probably define our business definition so we stay in the lane that we know we can win in. And so if you look at how Southwest has done this, they exist to connect people to the important events in their lives. They behave by being fun-loving with a warrior spirit and a servant's heart. And if you've ever flown Southwest, you probably experienced that at some point, right? There's a really famous story of a woman who's flying post 9/11. Flying for some people is very anxiety-ridden already. And they come on the overhead and they say stuff like, hey, if cabin pressure drops, oxygen mask will fall from the ceiling. Please place yours on your face first, and then on your children, starting with the one with most potential, right? Like they say stuff like that all the time. And this woman writes in and she's like, I can't believe, to Gary Kelly, the CEO, and says, I can't believe you would allow your employees to act this way These are FAA regulations. It's very serious. People have anxiety. And he has a very famous 3-word response. You know what he says? He says, we'll miss you, right? He says, I'm not gonna, this is the culture we want to have. I'm not gonna chastise my employees for living into what we want them to live into. And so we would rather deny your business than we would, take a crack at our own culture. And so that plays out all like in so many ways at Southwest, and we're going to use some of this language to develop some more stories. But I don't know if you notice this, if you fly Southwest, if you're willing to walk from Terminal 2 in Salt Lake, then and you fly Southwest, is the whole servant's heart thing. If you notice when Southwest planes land, the pilots come out of the cockpit and they clean with everyone else. It's like you have to have the servant's heart. And there's ways that they build into their hiring process and their onboarding process to make sure that people are living into their values. And someone had a question after our session yesterday. It was like, oh, we just had an acquisition. How do you continue to have culture as like through an acquisition? Well, Southwest Airlines went through an acquisition a long time ago when they did AirTrans. They merged with AirTrans, and it was part of their original why we exist statement was to democratize air travel. Before Southwest Airlines, air travel was like elitist. It was for the rich and business class only. And they set out to make air travel to democratize it. And AirTrans was a specific conversation that they had to be able to reach all these areas. They had to purchase a company that wasn't really good at any of the stuff they were good at. And when they did this, they had culture champions, and they said, hey, here's your mentor. So even though you're not good at like customer service and being on time, you're going to have a mentor that's going to teach you how we do it. And so it was one of the most successful acquisitions of all time because they had a strategy and they knew what their culture was, and they just cascaded that culture to the other company. So we're going to talk through how they've done some of those other successful decisions that they went through. Southwest answer to number 3 is we market, book, and transport passengers via airplane through commercial airports. Very simple. It's not, there's no like sexy like marketing words in there. It's just like, hey, here's our lane, so that if people get a question about something outside of our lane, they can say, we don't do that. And this is about focus. I've seen more companies grow by saying no than by saying yes. And too often, I think we're saying yes to too many things. And so this allows us to say, what are we going to say no to? The 4th question is, how are we going to succeed? We call these strategic anchors or strategic lenses. If we could get everyone in our organization looking through the same lenses when we make decisions, they are empowered to make a decision that we would probably make ourselves as executives. And so if you think of yourself like at the eye doctor and they're putting those lenses on, they're saying, can you see better now? Can you see better now? We want everyone just looking through the same lenses. And if you do this really well, it gives empowerment to employees throughout the entire organization at any level. So for Southwest Airlines, there's our on time, low fares, and customer service. Those are their 3 lenses by which they made every single decision. If you think about, do they have TVs on board? No, they don't. Because it helps them be more on time, and it saves money on fuel because the equipment is really heavy. Do they have leather seats? Yeah, they chose leather seats because it's quicker to clean, and therefore they can turn around the planes quicker. They have one type of plane because it helps them be more on time, and it allows them to change parts and keep fares low, right? Like every single decision that they've made, they've done through these lenses. And we're going to show how that empowers employees. But one of the best stories, like at a low level, like what this looks like at a low level within the organization, is we fly all the time. And oftentimes if we end a session early, I can go to the airport, and if I'm flying Southwest, I can say, hey, you know what? Can I get on this earlier flight because I want to go home and see my niece's tumbling class or whatever. And they say, you know what? I exist to connect people to the important events of their lives. So I want to help you. And I know that we behave by having a servant's heart. So I'm here for you. And then they say, well, you're here early, so let me just run this through these values real quick. Is it going to cause us to be less on time? No, you're here. Is it going to cause you to pay a higher fee? Well, we actually have an open seat on this flight, and maybe I can sell your seat on a later flight to someone else. So it actually would allow us to still keep our low fares. And then they say, if I can get you on this flight and it's not going to cost you anything, will that be a great customer service? And that person can look at me and go, yeah, why don't you jump on here and go see your niece? And I go, thank you. I love this company, right? Have you ever tried to do that on United? It's like, they are writing the code that would even allow them to see if there's a seat on the plane. It's like 20 minutes of typing. And then they're like, hold on, let me call my manager. This is like out of my scope. So they call their manager over, their manager comes, they're like, are you right or left-handed? I'm like, I don't know why this applies. You know, and then they say, yes, we can do it. It'll cost you 250 bucks. There's no empowerment. Their employees are more miserable because they can't make decisions. So that's what it looks like when we do it really well, as we communicate how we make decisions as an organization at the very lowest level of the organization. At a very high level, do you guys remember pre 9/11, no one charged for bags? You remember that? It was awesome. There was not an airline that charged for bags, but post 9/11, we as consumers say, okay, increase security measures, we get it. It's gonna cost us more to have our bags on board. And so there was a point in time where they had to make a decision. Southwest Airlines had to make a decision. And they were saying, do we do what everyone else in the industry does and charge for bags? Or do we maintain our values? Do we maintain our strategic anchors? And there was an article written in Time Magazine or New York Times that said the $800 million decision. And it was by virtue of how many passengers they transport. There's $800 million on the table if they just started charging for bags. And then they said, okay, let's just run it through our value. Let's run it through our anchors. Would it help us be more on time? Well, if you've ever flown on one of those airlines where they charge for bags, all that means is everyone brings all their bags on board and they try to jam it in the overhead until someone goes, hey, can we check that for free for you at the gate? And then they're like, oh, thank you, right? Like it causes this big traffic jam as we get on the plane. So no, it doesn't help us be more on time. Does it help us have low fares? Well, if you're charging me for my bag, it doesn't really fit that strategic anchor either. And if it's costing me more and I'm less on time, is it a great customer experience? And they said, hey, even though there's $800 million on the table, we're actually not going to charge for bags. And not only do they not charge for bags, they actually marketed that they don't charge for bags. And so Southwest Airlines for 40 years was the only airline that turned a profit. Southwest Airlines for 40 years was the only airline that never furloughed or had a massive layoff. And Southwest Airlines is constantly on their consumer reports for most on time and best customer service airline. Southwest Airlines also has about 60,000 employees and about 250 jobs open a year. They have 6,000 applicants. So they've created a culture where people want to be there because they've been really clear about how people fit in and how they're going to win. And so that's where we can get our team aligned. This is about getting everyone rowing in the same direction, building a culture where people are empowered to make decisions. So once we have that type of clarity, we call it a thematic goal. What's most important right now? In 25 years of consulting, we go to executive teams and we say, hey, what's your priority? And the word priority was actually singular until like 1930 or something. It wasn't that long ago where we made it plural. And then we talked about multitasking, which is a good way to get a lot of things done poorly. But like we would ask people, what's your single priority right now? In the next 3-6 months, what are you working on? And the record for an executive team, they handed us a list of 72. And we were like, oh, so nothing. You guys are going to get nothing done over the next. And we're really good at like building that 5-year strategic plan, or we're really good at following that 5-year financial model. We're really bad at saying, what does that next 3 months look like? And so we help teams create a crisis around something that needs to be done. What's the biggest, highest impact lever we can pull in the next 3, 6, 9 months? And that allows us to inform, like, how do we run our meetings? What kind of information are we bringing to those meetings? And so we call this a thematic goal because it really rallies an organization around one single thing. And then lastly, once we have that type of clarity, we also need to figure out who must do what. Now that we have all this type, like, how do I fit in? What's my role? And so that needs to be cascaded, not just at the executive level and what department you lead, but also to the next level of employees and all the way down into the lowest level on the field. So that's what we talk about when we talk about, one is behavioral alignment, 2 is intellectual alignment, right? Once we have intellectual alignment, then we need to over communicate clarity. Once we've developed clarity, you should be over communicating it. This is the hardest one for leaders. Do you know why? Anybody know why over communicating is hard for leaders? Yep. They feel like they're repetitive. So they feel like, man, this feels really disingenuous. Like it feels almost like pandering to say this over and over again, right? What's another reason leaders don't say things over and over again? You guys have probably experienced this. I'm the leader. I said it, you should go do it, right? Like I should say it and you should go do it. And I can't tell you how many times I was helping a team down in Lehigh go through a 4-company acquisition. And the leader, it's tons of stress, lots of confusion. Nobody knows what their role is. And someone asked a question. We're in a meeting, like there's 14 people in this room. Someone asked a question and he gets like really visibly upset. He says, I'm going to say this for the 1,000th time. And then he made a statement and I just turned to everyone. I was like, hey, who just heard that for the first time? And 13 to 14 people raised their hand. And I was like, I know it sucks, but that's your role as a leader, over communicating, right? I make the joke all the time. I've never met an employee that left an organization. I was like, hey, why did you leave? And they're like, they were just so clear about where we were going and like what my role was and what was, the next 6 months were going to look like. That's never happened. But employees leave all the time because they feel like they're not getting the right information or they're not being over communicated to. And there's a very fine line between, we would say people need to be reminded more than they need to be instructed. When you remind them, hey, here's where we're going, here's how you fit in, that's cultural and they can adopt into that. When we instruct them, it feels like micromanaging, right? Like if we over instruct, it feels like micromanaging. So there's a fine line there. We're going to talk more about this, but anybody familiar with Alan Mulally? Alan Mulally, the CEO who left Boeing to take over Ford when Ford was projected to lose $17 billion. You remember that? Yeah. So if you haven't read this book, American Icon, it's a fantastic book, highly recommend. Alan Mulally left Boeing to take over Ford when Ford was projected to lose $17 billion. He likes to brag. They were going to lose $17 billion in a year. He likes to brag that they did it in 3 months. Somehow he managed to do that in 3 months. And at the time, Time Magazine did this. You know how they do most influential people articles? So at the time, it was the Pope, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and Alan Mulally. This guy is an incredible leader. And they said, Alan, how are you going to do this? How are you going to take Ford, who's hemorrhaging money, and turn this thing around, get us back in the black? And he said, oh, I created this thing called the One Ford program. If you've never looked up the One Ford program, it's really the answer to those 6 questions. He put them on a business card and he passed it out to every single employee in the organization. He said, here's how we're going to get Ford back on track. And Time Magazine at the time did like this expose. They were like, Alan Mulally is incredible. He has this One Ford program. It's actually going to work. And through that whole process, Alan Mulally, who didn't take bailout money, who didn't fly on private jets down to get subpoenaed by Congress or whatever they were doing with the government, turns Ford around, and Time Magazine comes back and they say, oh my gosh, you did it. What's next? And Alan Mulally turns to them and he goes, I'm probably just going to do the same thing, right? Like it worked, right? Like we get so caught up in not over communicating because we think we need to say it a different way or it needs to be a new flavor of the month. It doesn't. Clarity is a strategy, and it's about getting people rowing in the same direction so that you can win as an organization. So over communication is key because there's a natural barrier, but like here, you guys could be a cohesive team and have clarity as an executive leadership team, right? That's easy. It's a small team. You guys have offsites. You get to talk about strategy. How are we actually pushing this down through the organization? That becomes hard. So there's this barrier right here that we have to overcome to get this through the organization. And then once we've over communicated clarity, the last piece of this is we need to reinforce clarity. And reinforcing clarity is really around how do we build this into our human systems in a real way? So how do we hire people? Most people hire for proficiency and they fire for behavior, right? They're like, wow, they're really good, like, in these areas, proficient. And then they get on the team and their behavior detracts from the culture that we want. And so we have to actually let them go because of their behavior. We would say hire for behavior, and proficiency is just permission to play. Like if you can't do the job, you don't belong here, but we're looking for a really specific type of person that will fuel our culture. So it's how are we hiring? How are we onboarding? Most companies onboard with like, hey, here's your credentials. You can go see HR, and then here's your login to all the stuff you have to log into. That's very different than saying, hey, I want to take a minute to tell you why we exist as an organization so you can connect to a higher purpose for what you do here. Here's how you're going to be expected to behave, right? And here's what it means. Here's what it doesn't mean. Like integrity, here's what it means to us. Here's what it doesn't mean. We're actually onboarding them with our culture and our strategy. So here's how you're empowered to make decisions. So it's how are we hiring? How are we onboarding? How are we dismissing people? How are we rewarding? And most importantly is how do we run our meetings? Meetings is the lifeblood of your organization. People have distorted meetings so much in this modern era where people think that what they do outside of meetings is more important than what they do inside of meetings. And I can assure you that you as leaders, the decisions you make in those meetings actually affect thousands of people's livelihoods. So rather than it being like everyone thinks that game time is what you do outside of meetings, we actually think game time is the meeting. And so if I love to further this analogy with my teams is because a lot of people struggle with being focused in meetings, speaking up in meetings, having healthy conflict in meetings. We just go to them because they're on our calendar. So the challenge I give to most of my leaders is, hey, number one, this meeting is your most expensive meeting when you guys are together. So if you're not using it that way, you're not having hard conversations, making important decisions, that's like a misuse of company money. That's number one. Number two is when you guys come and you're not fully engaged, imagine if this is game time and you're like, let's say this is the field and we're in a stadium and all your people are watching. Are they going to be cheering for you? Like, oh, they're giving it their all. Or are they going to be like, they were on their phone the whole time. We should take them out, right? Like we have to go into this meeting mentality with like, these decisions matter. And we talk a lot about, we don't have preset agendas in our meetings because people get really good at highlighting things that they do well and really good at running out of time for things that are not going well. And so this all shows up in your meetings. And there's a book, that Death by Meeting book. There's an online tool that we use called the Meeting Advantage tool. Highly recommend. It's the most simple, fast, practical, efficient tool that we use with teams. So definitely check that out, and we'll provide you guys with some resources after our session. So those are the 4 disciplines. We're going to deep dive into number 1, but out of curiosity, which one do you guys think, if you're willing to be vulnerable, you could do better at your organization? Creating clarity, high level and low level. Okay. It's just like we need to be telling our employees what we're doing, why we're doing it. The answer, the why. Yeah. 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 Oftentimes when we make decisions, and our employees are questioning why, it probably means we haven't communicated our strategy, right? And when we are not aligned as a team, when we're not aligned at an executive level, it actually leaves our employees to fight unwinnable battles. They fight against each other because you guys aren't clear at the executive level, right? So thank you. Any others willing to call out what can we do better? Yeah, Devin.
Establishing that why. I mean, like I hear about like at Chick-fil-A or Southwest or Apple, and they're awesome. And then I come back to our company and I'm like, what is our why?
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, this clarity is a strategy, and there's a culture that exists whether you define it. Taking that time to define it is really important because we actually believe the answers to these questions are just as important as the process at which we arrive at them, right? So getting people like talking about this, understanding what they mean and what they don't mean is really important, because if it's not true and it's not genuine and authentic, it's really hard to communicate to the employees. Any other thoughts? Great. Yeah, Roger.
I just would like short, clear mission statement.
Yep.
Southwest, the Nike has their short, something that everybody can remember.
Yep.
You get a long mission statement.
And that's the thing. It's so true, and they're so generic. Pat, in his book, The Advantage, he puts a company mission statement on there, and it's probably something to the effect of, we exist to provide the best quality products and the best customer service to our community and beyond. And like, and then he asks you to guess what it is. And people are like, oh, that's Intel, or that's Enron, and it's Dunder Mifflin Paper Company from The Office. It's like, guys, we got to have some, this should actually separate us. This should actually draw people to us because we're so clear about this. Like, people want to come. What would separate you and your team from the same company down the street that's doing the exact same thing? Why would someone work for you? And it's probably, the answer is here if we're really clear about this. Yeah.
We were laughing. I don't know if you saw it, but we literally, before coming here today, we're booking tickets for an event coming up, and we were debating Delta because of the credit card that's fancy and the free TV,
Yeah.
versus I'm a Southwest advocate. And as you sat here and went through this culture and how they exist and why they exist, literally those are all experiences that I brought to the table.
Yep.
And she offered an iPad for the TV.
Yeah.
And so now to hear these things, you can see a company fully living it out. And as a dedicated, chooser of that travel for exactly those experiences, that there was no questions asked to change my flight to come home earlier. And now I understand why.
Yeah.
But I felt it before I knew it.
Yeah. And that's why, I do love Delta as well. Like, but like, there is there is a difference when you fly, and that's what we're trying to figure out. Like, what would, and a lot of your businesses are customer based. Those are the ones that we love working with the most. Like, product companies are great, but the product can't really tell the story. When you're like in the hotel industry or you run grocery stores, like, you walk in, people should feel different if you're really good at this, right? Like Southwest is an example of that. It feels different to get on a Southwest plane than almost any other one in the industry. And it's not for everyone, because like when you're talking to a room full of executives with, status, they're like, yeah, right, Southwest. I'm like, I get it. You get picked up in a private car. You get to go, like, you can do whatever you want, but we're talking about the company as a whole, right? So yeah, thank you for pointing that out. So we're gonna deep dive into how to start this. How do we build a cohesive leadership team? This is based on Pat's best-selling book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. We would be the first organization to tell you, hey, there are probably 1,000 ways to build a team out there. There's so many different companies out there that facilitate team building, but we would tell you that these 5 behaviors, if your team does not exhibit them, it will actually destroy your team. It will erode your culture. So the first fundamental element of any successful team, and if you think back to, sometimes we ask people like, hey, what was the best team you've ever been on? And we kind of just crowdsource all these, like, what made it great? These are really the elements that stand out. And so the foundation of any team, nonprofit, for-profit, big company, small company, doesn't matter, is trust. And when we say trust, oftentimes we ask, hey, when I say trust as it relates to a team, what do you think trust looks like? What do you think trust looks like on a team? Nobody has trust on this?
That your leadership had your back when you leave the room, that they're
Yeah.
asking questions as to why you did things and to understand why you made decisions.
Yeah, so that your leadership has your back, understanding why you did things, how you made decisions. What were you gonna say?
I just think like accountability. I just think you can trust people on your team to follow through with what they say they're gonna do.
Yep.
Or like that, yeah, they're gonna be kind of there. You're working together as a team to catch each other and have each other's back.
Yep. Yeah, so oftentimes, and you guys you kind of teetered on both of those types of trust that we talked about. Most of the time when we ask teams, hey, what does trust look like? They give us the answer for predictability-based trust. And predictability-based trust is, hey, we've worked together for 10 years. I know how you're going to show up. You're going to come prepared. You're going to be on time. You have my back, right? That's great. We're not advocating that that's not a good thing. We actually think that's a really good thing to have. It takes a long time to build, right? What we're advocating for is what we call vulnerability-based trust. And vulnerability-based trust is being able to say things like, hey, I'm sorry, I was wrong. That decision I made, that wasn't the right one. Or you're better at this than me, can you help? Or I didn't understand that, can you repeat that again, right? Like, there's an armor that we place on ourselves at executive levels or leadership levels where we think we have to know everything and we think we have to be able to do everything. And that lack of vulnerability actually cascades its way through our organization. And so for you guys, vulnerability-based trust is really important because we have to have that vulnerability on our team for our team to express that. Like, if we're not expressing vulnerability, no one else will. And there's a study that Google did called the Aristotle Project. Anybody heard of that? They spent like millions of dollars studying thousands of their teams. They're data driven. They wanted to figure out what's the single greatest data point to high performing teams. And they, after months and lots of money studying tons of teams, they came down to 2 words. The single greatest data point for high functioning teams is psychological safety. That's it. Like, people can go in and say what they need to say without fear of retribution, right? And so that's another way of saying vulnerability-based trust. Hey, I trust that you're not going to take this the wrong way. And to go back to that Alan Mulally story, is the reason we need, there's a reason to build trust on a team. And it's because when Alan Mulally took over Ford, Ford was running their meetings the way, Alan Mulally was running their meetings the way that that we asked people to do that, which is simple, like, hey, red, yellow, green, tell us how it's going in your area. And then we'll identify some problems and try to solve them together. So he walked into his meeting room on week 1. He said, okay, everyone, how's everything going in your department? Red, yellow, green. Let's just kind of get a assessment of how the company's doing. And they had a culture where if you showed vulnerability, if you showed weakness, you would be replaced, okay? So the first week, Alan walks in, says, red, yellow, green. Everyone goes, green, 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 green. And he goes, great, no meeting. If everything's green, we have nothing to talk about, right? Next week, hey, how's everyone doing? Green, 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 green. He goes, all right, no meeting. Third week he comes in, same response, and he says, hey, I just have to ask, I'm kind of a business guy, I'm responsible for this company. If everyone's department is green, how are we losing $17 billion, right? Just, I don't know, someone throw me a bone here. And one guy who went on to do great things later as a CEO, he raises his hand and he says, actually, my department is more like yellow. And Alamalai says, hey, come up here and sit next to me. And everyone's like, oh my gosh, he's gonna fire him right here in front of us. And Alamalai says, hey guys, this is the only person I can trust on this team because he's the only one willing to admit there's a problem. And if we can't admit that there's problems, we can't solve them. And in his book, he writes, the hardest part about being a leader is making decisions without all the information, right? And it's because we haven't created a culture where we're vulnerable enough in our meetings to talk about the most important thing. What's on fire? Let's try to fix this together. We have a personal mentality rather than a team mindset. And so trust is absolutely foundational for us on a team. And when we work with executives, we work quarterly with them. We go back to trust every single time. It doesn't take that long to build. It's just, you have to be intentional. And so there's 3 ways you can build trust. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but spending time together, this is a huge one. And oftentimes, I know it feels weird to say when you think about your work family or your work team, spending time together is really important, but it's intentional time, right? We can't just get together and be like, oh, how's the weather in Roy? Oh, it's good in Salt Lake. Like that doesn't really build trust, right? We actually need to be intentional with the time we do spend together. And as companies have transitioned into more work from home, they need this more than ever. And they're calling us and they're like, hey, we have no trust in our team. It's like, when's the last time you guys got together, right? We actually have to spend time together to build trust. So spending time together, and it's actually about what are we doing with that time? One of our consultants in Atlanta says, trust can't be built on the calendar because it likely wasn't broken on the calendar. So you're not going to be able to build that trust in your meetings. They're already jam-packed. So we might have to get outside of those meetings to build some trust. The next is understanding each other's personality styles, like Myers-Briggs, Enneagram, 6 types of working genius. I tell every leader I work with, self-awareness is the first step to emotional intelligence. If you are not self-aware, it's really hard to work with others. So it's not only like, hey, let me understand myself better, let me understand my teammates better, because it's going to help us enter into better conflict. It's going to help us understand how we make decisions or process information or approach the world. Those things are really important. And then the last one is know how we kind of grew up. Like it gives us a context. Like I have a twin brother. I can argue all day long and go home and dream sweet, sweet dreams. It does not bother me at all. But that's not how someone else grew up. So maybe if we understood each other a little bit more, we wouldn't create these false narratives about each other, right? So those are the 3 ways, and we'll put them up on the screen here this afternoon. So foundational element is trust. We have to have trust so we can enter into healthy conflict. We will tell you that conflict without trust is politics. Like that's I'm advocating for myself or my team. Conflict with trust is just the ideological pursuit of truth. Like let's just debate something and find the best possible answer. And conflict is really how we define it. You guys need to create rules of engagement around conflict. Everyone comes to the room with a different experience when it comes to conflict, whether it's how they grew up or the business that or the previous job that they've been at. Let's just establish rules of engagement. We help teams develop what we call team norms so that it just facilitates better conflict. Intel is disagree and commit. We need you to actually disagree in the meeting and then commit to the decisions that we make. Nike is just say it. We don't want you to nod your head. We want you just to say it in the room. Or be on time, come prepared. These are all things that we can hold each other accountable to because we've created a framework for conflict, okay? So conflict is important because we're not driving for consensus. We're driving for commitment, right? Like we need to have conflict because if we don't have conflict, there's a decision line right here. If we don't have conflict before the decision, it comes out after the decision, right? Highly recommend having conflict before you make decisions. So conflict is, we talk about it in terms of like, we need to find where's that constructive conflict. It's constructive conflict exists between artificial harmony, which most companies live in. Artificial harmony, you guys seen that? Like, yeah, I don't want to stir the pot. I don't want to call that person out. I know how bad this went last time. And mean-spirited personal attacks. Those are the ends of it. And that's kind of what you were talking about earlier is there's a place where we're entering into ideological debate. And there's a place where we're talking more about who is right. So it's more, we need to find that sweet spot where we have constructive conflict, where we're arguing about what is right and not who is right. And we need to build a framework for that. So the reason we have conflict is because if we don't have conflict, we will not get commitment from the decisions that we make. So commitment is really not, it's not about arguing like you're right and listening like you're right. It's actually like arguing like you're right, but listening like you're wrong. Getting people, we don't want consensus on your team. We actually would say, if you get consensus, if you're coming to decisions earlier, bring other people in the room, because this is unhealthy. We're probably not poking enough holes in these ideas. So commitment is about commitment to the decisions that we make like they're our own. Colin Powell describes this kind of process between conflict and commitment as loyalty. He says, hey, behind closed doors, if you think I'm going to make a mistake, argue with me and try to convince me of it. But when we leave the room, we need to be in lockstep. And too many leaders leave a room like they go, hey, I went in, I advocated for us. I know we needed more headcount. I know we needed more resources, but Johnny CEO, he made a different decision. And that is creating politics within your organization. They go back and tell their team, hey, I did my best, but they chose something else. Instead of saying, oh, you know what, we had it out. We actually talked about it. This is the decision we made, and we think this is the best thing for the organization. And you could get that same answer from anyone on my executive team. So one of my favorite stories about commitment is that when I was at the North Face, we released a jacket called the thermal ball jacket. Has anybody ever heard of thermal ball jacket? It was supposed to revolutionize the industry. I'm not surprised that you guys didn't hear about it, because it didn't do that well. Okay, we released this jacket. It's a synthetic down, same heat to warmth ratio, more friendly for the environment. Never one place, always one jacket. Great slogan. Had it all. And we released it, didn't do that well. And we're in this meeting, and like we have rock stars, like people from Mountain Hardwear, Patagonia, Marmot, and Todd Spoleto was our CEO at the time. And I didn't realize that Todd Spoleto was actually working with the Table Group. And Todd Spoleto has everyone just kind of hash it out in the room. What do we do next? How do we re-release this? What are we going to do? And he goes around the room and he asks people like, hey, I want to hear from you. I want to hear from you. And then he says, here's my decision. And he went around the room and he said, can you support my decision? Can you support my decision? Can you support my decision? He didn't say, do you like my decision? Do you agree with my decision? He said, can you support it? And he got everyone's support, because leaving that room, everyone needed to execute like it was their own. And that's why the weigh in to buy in conversation. We need people to weigh in, because then they're more likely to buy in. 99% of the time, if people feel heard, they're willing to buy into a decision that wasn't their own. So commitment is huge, because we need to actually drive for solid marching orders. The next is accountability. If we're committed to the same ideas for the whole organization, we should be able to exercise peer-to-peer accountability. Peer-to-peer accountability on healthy teams actually builds trust. But what we see with most organizations is that we see hub and spoke accountability. I can't do my job because Sherry's not doing her job. So I go to my boss and I say, hey, Roger, can you go talk to Sherry? I can't get anything done because she's not being responsible. And it puts the leader in the loneliest position of all. Like, go solve my problem for me. And the leader goes to Sherry and says, hey, someone on the team said that you're not doing your job. What just happened? Broke trust with everyone on the team, not just me. All of her, she's like, because her first response is, who? Why wouldn't they just come to me? And so on healthy teams, peer-to-peer accountability is the first source. We can go to each other. If we can't solve this, let's go get someone involved. The leader becomes the ultimate source. And therefore, we can build trust by having hard conversations with one another. So accountability is peer-to-peer, with the leader being the ultimate source. And then lastly is the last behavior is we have to be collectively focused on results. You guys actually need to, as an organization, define winning and losing the same way. And that's the whole idea of, we talked about team number one versus team number two. Team number one is the team you're on, okay? That's the team you sit on. Team number two is the team you lead. And most organizations, they function like the UN. When we ask them, hey, tell us about your team, they're like, oh, well, my team. And it's actually, this is your team. And what they do is they end up lobbying for the team that they lead, rather than putting the hat of the team that they're on, so that we can make better decisions for the whole organization. And the mindset is, what we see oftentimes is, hey, my department's not on fire, your department's on fire. And if we thought, like, if we defined results collectively, it would be like saying, hey, my side of the boat's not sinking, your side of the boat's sinking. It's like, the boat's sinking. Let's time, energy, resources, let's help, right? And so it makes sense. It's a simple triangle. These are not, like, you probably felt these before. What we see with most organizations is they flip this upside down. So they start with results first, and they say, hey, we didn't get the results we wanted. Who do we hold accountable? We go to that person, we say, hey, why aren't you executing? Why aren't you hitting your metrics the way that you should? And they say, honestly, I wasn't really committed to that idea. I didn't really like it from the beginning. They're like, what do you mean you weren't committed? You were in the meeting. Why didn't you say that? And they say, well, honestly, I don't really trust that you guys have, that you guys even listen to what I say, right? So it really does start with this foundation of trust. And the better you guys can facilitate this in your teams, the more you're gonna see an impact on behaving more like a cohesive team. So I'm gonna show you guys what your role is as leaders when it comes to this triangle. When it comes to trust, your role is you have to go first. If you're not vulnerable, no one else will be. And oftentimes we get leaders that call us and they say, hey, we need your help. Our director level team, they don't have any trust. There's tons of politics. And I go, who do you think they learned it from? It's from you guys. Like, we're not going to work with them until we can work with you. And so this is about you guys being vulnerable first to build that vulnerability on your team. Next, when it comes to having healthy conflict, you have to mine for it. You guys have to understand how to have better conversations, and you have to say, hey, I want to hear from you. What do you have to say about this? I haven't, or if I know that if I know your personality preference, I can say, hey, have you formulated your thoughts on this, or do you need more time? Because I want to hear what you have to say. And we're actually pulling conflict out instead of just saying, hey, anybody disagree? No, let's call each other out. Let's ask. Everyone speaks twice before someone, or everyone speaks once before someone speaks twice. Commitment, your role is what Todd Spoleto did, drive for clarity and closure. You actually have to say, here's the decision, here's what we discussed, here's what we decided, here's what we're gonna say, here's what we're not gonna say, right? You guys have to drive for that type of clarity. And then when it comes to accountability, have difficult conversations early and often. You guys are gonna need to, this part of being a leader is having hard conversations. There's some great stories that Pat tells around this, but the key component is problems don't get better. So the earlier you guys can address them, the better it's going to be for the team. And then lastly is you have to keep your team focused on collective outcomes. So, and those all make sense. There's an assessment you can take based on these 5 dysfunctions with your team. It'll spit out a score, red, yellow, green. How are we doing as an organization? You can identify like really specific areas where we could do better and make commitments to them. That's available online. You could read the book. There's a paper assessment in the back. There's a lot of options to figure out how to do this. But what we would ask you guys is think about these questions, or this is when it comes to building trust. We talked about this earlier. Spend time together, understand each other's personality preferences or working styles, and then get to know one another on a deeper level, like why you show up the way you do. The questions we would leave you guys with today is, does my team lean into vulnerability-based trust? And if they're not, are they willing to breed, or if they are they willing to bring up hard conversations? Do they feel psychologically safe in our meetings, right? And we're going to share this PowerPoint with you guys so you'll have these as well. Next is, what role do I play in a leader in building trust among my team or organization? So am I leading with vulnerability first, or am I expecting it from others? And then lastly is, of the 5 dysfunctions of a team, which does my team struggle with the most, and what can I do to change it? What I would ask you guys as leaders is, if something resonated with you, make a commitment. I work with an executive coach in Lehigh, and I ask him, hey, what's the biggest contributing factor you see to great leaders who people want to follow? And he says, people who ask for feedback and that do something about it. Like when they make a commitment, they actually follow through. And so something resonated with you, make a commitment to yourself, write it down, share it with someone else, have them hold you accountable, but really try to like lean into that first step of becoming a healthy organization and build off these 5 dysfunctions. That's probably it.
Thank you.